Here are 5 ideas that I stole from Oscar Peterson's C Jam Blues. C Jam Blues is part of the Night Train album released by the Oscar Peterson Trio in 1963. It features Oscar Peterson on the piano, Ed Thigpen on drums, and Ray Brown on bass. As the name C Jam Blues implies, this is a 12-bar blues form. However, it's different in that it adds 4 additional bars at the end where the band sits out and Oscar just gets to do whatever he wants in the break. And speaking of those 4-bar breaks, let's take a look at lick number 1, which comes right from the first break at the end of the introduction. What I want you to notice about this idea is the chromatic line between the D sharp and the G. Oscar's trying to guide your ear toward the G, and he's using chromatic notes to get you there. The D sharp to the G is 4 eighth notes, which is 2 full beats. But take a look at where Oscar wants the G to end rhythmically. In the first line, the G ends on the and of 4, so the D sharp starts on the and of 2. But if you look ahead, he does the same thing an octave higher, and this time the G ends on the beat, on beat 1, and so he starts the D sharp on beat 3 ahead of time. Oscar knows it takes him 2 beats to get to that G he's aiming for. In this idea, I want you to look for the hidden chromatic line in the first measure. There's a G to an F sharp to an F in there. And it's kind of packaged up around some other Cs to look like an arpeggio and have some interesting rhythm. And then in the second measure, here it is again from our first idea, the D sharp to the G chromatic line. The PDF of all these ideas is down in the description. You can have it totally for free. While you're down there, hit the like button, the subscribe button. This idea is actually one of my favorite Oscarisms of all time. He's kind of just drumming here on this A. And the note A is an interesting choice in the C blues because the A works really well across all 3 chords in the blues. On the C, it's the 13th, on the F, it's the 3rd, and on the G, it's the 9th. But he's just playing straight 8th notes, so why is this rhythmically interesting? I think it's interesting because he starts it 2 beats too early. The first measure I've notated here is actually the last measure of the 12-bar blues, meaning he's starting his phrase 2 beats before his 4-bar solo break happens. Oftentimes when you start a phrase early, you're leading somebody towards the downbeat, but in this case he's not. He's actually tricking you into where the downbeat is. He's taking a type of phrase we're used to hearing on the downbeat, but he's starting it on beat 3, and this kind of confuses us. He then uses accents with that G sharp, the lower chromatic neighbor, to hint at where the downbeat is, but he's lying to us. The first time he uses that G sharp accent note, it's on the downbeat, but we don't think it is. Because he started the phrase 2 beats early, it actually feels like an accent on beat 3. Later on, when he does it a second time, he does it on beat 3, which now feels like it is the downbeat to us. So he's messed with our sense of time. By keeping the 8th note constant, he's given us the confidence to understand the rhythm, but by putting the accents in weird places, he's kind of thrown us off kilter. It's not till the band comes back in squarely on beat 1 in the next phrase that we realize what he's done. In this idea, Oscar follows a classic blues technique, which is to take a blues scale riff, 2 measures long, and repeat it over the entire blues form. This phrase is entirely based on the blues scale, and since the blues scale works really well over all 3 chords of the blues form, you can play this same thing over all 3 chords. That's exactly what he does here. He takes this 2-bar phrase, and he repeats it 6 times over the 12-bar blues form. There it is again in measure 2, D sharp to G, the chromatic line we've seen before. This idea comes from the very end of the tune, and it's the most harmonically complex. And the main idea to look at here are enclosures. An enclosure is just a technique bebop players use to surround a note. So let's say you were aiming for the note C, you could surround it with the note a whole step above and then the note a half step below. So you could do D to B natural and then land on your C. And that's exactly how he starts off this phrase, D, B natural, C. In fact, he does it again in the third measure, and then he does it again in the final phrase. This is something that creates a lot of confusion in beginning bebop players. Why in the world would I play a B natural over a C7 chord? It's less about those two notes being part of the chord as it is them being rhythmic placeholders to get you toward the note that you're aiming for. There's actually another hidden enclosure in here at the beginning of the fourth bar where he uses two chord tones, the G and the E, to aim for the F, a non-chord tone. And he's just doing that to create tension in order to resolve it at the end of the line. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one where I challenged myself to play Donna Lee at Charlie Parker's full tempo.